let's get on, I guess, to the subject at hand today. Subject at hand today, as I believe I've shared out as well on the screen. Let me know if you can't see what's shared out. I'm not sure how the polls interfere or interact with that or not, but I'm in theory sharing out the presentation here today entitled Implementing Departments for PCCE and ECE. PCCE, of course, is Packaged Contact Center Enterprise. ECE is Enterprise Chat and Email. Departments go hand in hand with those two products, as you'll hopefully learn today. Brief introduction and an agenda for you. My name is Mike Keitzer. I'm an instructor here at Sunset Learning. You may or may not have had class with myself, or maybe Mark Wilson or Bruce Wilkinson. We're three primary instructors for Contact Center Enterprise, sometimes Express if pressed into service. Most of us started off in the UC world, and a couple of us before that really in the route switch world. So we've been around, I guess, a lot of Cisco things for quite a while. And we're the authors of, as you'll see towards the end of this presentation, 7 new courses, all based on packaged version 12.x. We run 12.6 in the labs. And we'd, like you to share the good news about those courses and send all your friends to training if you can. That would be pretty cool by us. So a little snippet here today on departments. And agenda here is we'll talk about, first off, with departments, comes this concept of roles, and actually this morning's conversation that we had with a couple of other topics. This morning's topic of conversation was on business hours. Question came up about roles in business hours, so we'll actually talk about that here a little bit. We've also talked about collecting log files and ECE navigation via the SPOG, so you might check on those videos as well. Should have access to that. But today we'll talk about roles. Roles would be something you'd want to think about maybe before you implement departments. The theory behind departments, generally speaking, is they are what they sound like they are. They're a way to take an instance of your package deployment. An instance is kind of an ICM or CCE term for all of your servers combined together. You might have a production instance and a test instance, by example, where you work, or maybe several production instances, who knows, but this one instance, a way to divide it up into multiple lines of business, is this thing called a department, as we'll talk about. And with departments would come, well, geez, I probably want a department administrator for that department over there where they can take care of those scripts and maybe their configuration items, and maybe another department administrator over here. So roles, administrators, who can do what within the configuration will be a forethought ahead of departments. And you'll notice that we'll break departments out into 2 groupings here. One would be CCE departments and one would be ECE departments. So CCE departments become departments that all show up in enterprise chat and email, and we'll talk about that. And leave you with just a quick snippet here of, if you are using ECE, when you go to import objects from CCE, what you'd actually need to maybe pay attention to on a per department basis. And at the end of this marketing promotion, tell you how to maybe save 20% off your next class that you take. Come on, computer. Play nicely with me here. There we go. Okay, so PCCE roles. Should mention to you that roles are agnostic really to UCCE or PCCE. Back in the days of roles, they used to be called feature control set lists in the UCC world. And these days in the package world, they're called roles officially, which is a more, I guess, common term than whatever feature control set lists were. Controls what features you have access to. So these roles we have within the packaged environment. And by the way, this department concept is also a packaged only implementation. Departments don't really formally exist over there in the UCCE world, only the package world. Okay, so we're in the package world. We're in the SPOG. SPOG is the single pane of glass. That's the web-based interface we use to manage our packaged environment, starting in version 12. And we're in the user setup card, where we're going to find down here these things called roles. And we notice that when we open up roles, we actually have a couple of different built-in roles by default. that give you kind of default access to agent tools or agent scripting tools or system administrator access to everything. And of course, you can create new modified roles to give you basically access to what it is you might want. And here, by example, when you open up a role or add a new role, we've got a kind of a partial snippet of some of the things that you would see. There'd be actually multiple categories along the way. But by example, we just maybe want to give somebody access to script editor. And they would have, limited access to things like configuration manager and or the SPOG and full access to script editor. And again, there's various ways in there that you can actually delve down to even say within script editor, I only want to allow them to do a couple of modifications with nodes, maybe, give them access to read-only access in script editor or browse mode. Who knows what you're trying to do over there. But bottom line here is you can, before you go crazy creating departments, maybe you ought to have a discussion on roles and who needs to do what, where, and how. Here we've got a custom role for agent admin. So again, similar process based on the checkboxes that we check. Looks like we're allowing somebody with this role as an agent admin to do agent stuff, as well as within an organization do teams, PQs, attributes, departments, et cetera, but maybe not infrastructure stuff overall. So that's all pretty cool. Just more examples therein. Agent desktop admin, same thing, right? What tools do we want to actually allow people to use as some kind of a user of the system, or in this case, an administrator? CCE administrators then get set up under the administrators section. And as you might imagine, what we do when we create some kind of a username as an administrator, which by the way comes from Active Directory account, right? So here's a username of Mr. Scripter. That's an Active Directory user somewhere along the way that we are assigning what to? Oh yeah, one of those roles we just talked about. And notice at the bottom, whether or not we want to have access to all departments. That would certainly apply to our discussion here regarding departments. So it looks like we've added some new administrators in this particular case along the way. If you're a CCE user, maybe prior to version 12, what we basically have just got done discussing would have been formerly known as users and feature control set lists, which you would have used via configuration manager tool. So concept has been around here actually for quite a long time, although it's just changed names a little bit. Configuring CC administrators, 3 things to note. Before you create an administrator user, make sure that user is in Active Directory. As we just pointed out, when you bring up that user or administrator list, you are supplying a domain within there where that user is going to be found. To add other users, you have to be a system administrator. You can't add, update, or delete yourself as an administrator. You can't give yourselves more privileges. Administrators may be defined as global admins or department admins as detailed below. Well, you don't have anything below. This is a snippet from another class, but as you saw in the checkbox, you're either a global admin or you're a department admin. And you'll see those admins show up here in the next section on departments. So we're still on the SPOG. And before we actually get back into the SPOG, we kind of want you to know that there are a bunch of objects that are department-based that you would normally be working with. So administrators, one of the things we just talked about. Agents and teams, when you assign or create an agent, supervisor would fall into that category as well. You can associate those people with a department or not, right? They could be global or not. And you'll see that relationship here in a second. Same thing with teams, can be department-based. Attributes, which we use for PQs, could be department-based. Bucket intervals, which are really multiple lines in the reporting sand, right? Instead of having one service level of 30 seconds, bucket intervals would be multiple lines in the sand, and those can be department-based, mostly for reporting purposes. Call types, dialed numbers, right? All department-based. Agent desk settings. Network VRU scripts, so you could actually have different micro apps, different IVR applications for each department would be a way to categorize those out. We used to use that in the UCCE world. using customer definitions, which was kind of the rudimentary way that you had an ability to create a department-like structure that officially exists over here in the package world. PQs, which would go hand in hand with your attributes, and skill groups, of course, could be department-based. So a bunch of items are actually department-based that you can see how you would want to let this department have their own groups of salespeople, different than this department's groups of salespeople, if that was in fact a line of business consideration. So last thing we're going to do here is add a department over in CCE. And departments fall under the organizational setup card, apparently down at the bottom here. And when we open this up, we would note that by default, there are no departments added, but looks like we've added a couple of different departments. Departments have been added for home, house and contents, life, marine. Looks like this happens to be a department we've added for our insurance company along the way that we deal with in class. Just as an example, and notice that for one department that we've created down here, this new department with the name of house and contents, we also have an ability to add administrators for that department, which are those people that we previously defined as admins with their roles. Okay, so adding a department is pretty doggone easy. You just supply a new name for your department and you go, okay, well, that didn't seem too hard. So what are some implications here? As far as a administrator access, we've got, remember, a couple of different types of administrators. We could have department administrators. We could also have global administrators. So remember, the global administrators would have access to global objects as well as all department objects. Department administrators have, of course, access to their department stuff, but not other items listed as department-based items, but they would have access, of course, to global items. Right? So by example, a dialed number. If you didn't make it a department-based dialed number, that administrator could see that dialed number as well as their own department-based dialed number. And notice what kind of access we would have is read-only versus read-write. So we have access to our stuff and we can see things that are also global-based, but maybe not modified. That's an administrator access end result. And I left this slide in here. I think it was worth mentioning that things have dependencies, right? Dialed numbers are dependent on call types and vice versa. And agents go into skill groups, and you could throw attributes in that as well. So don't forget, if you're making one thing department-based, maybe you need to make the other thing department-based as well, maybe even for an access purpose. And here's an example of access or department configuration, not now based on an administrative function, but based on an agent function. So can I put an agent into a skill group or an attribute, if you will? Well, I've got an agent defined as being in part of Department 1. Pardon me. I can put that agent certainly into a Department 1 skill group. I could put that agent into a global skill group, but I cannot add that agent to a skill group that's not in my same department. Same thing over here on the side. Department 2 agent can go in Department 2 or global skill groups, but not Department 1. Okay. That seems to make some sense. All right, so what we've shown you so far is got roles. You've got administrators, which you should probably define before departments. Departments are just a way to kind of subcategorize a bunch of objects in CCE, things like dial numbers and call types and micro apps and things of that nature. Create a new line of business, if you will. Would have, in theory, reporting implications along the way. And with the administrator access that we showed you and roles, certainly a way to take a piece of your pie and put it over here and say, all right, you people administer that piece of the pie. And you other people over here administer that piece of the pie, as well as users and things of that nature. And that was on the ECE side of the house. Of course, from there, you'd configure your dialed numbers and put them in the appropriate departments and whatnot, and do scripting is the understanding. On the ECE side of the house, though, if you're implementing ECE, you'd also want to know about some department-based implications over there. We'll tell you over in ECE what is a department. It's again the same thing. It's a way to subcategorize a group of objects. In this case, chat agents for this department versus chat agents for that department over there. What you'd want to know is that by default over in ECE, there is one department that doesn't by default match CCE because there's by default no departments in CCE, but there's one department in ECE named service that we're kind of showing you right above here. And if you don't have other departments in CCE, what you'd simply see is one department named service over here in ECE. But the moment you start creating departments in CCE, over there in ICM, your departments are going to automatically show up over here in ECE, assuming you, of course, have ECE integrated with CCE, is the theory there. So we'll show you just a couple of quick things on department implications over here in ECE and some things to think about. If you want more information on actually department-based navigation, we actually did that in a presentation yesterday, which you could tune into should you choose to do that. So what is a department? Again, as mentioned, departments help segment, package, or the ECE organization for maybe routing or security, line of business benefits. Remember, package departments are ECE departments. All departments exist under the business partition. The business partition, that's an ECE thing. Where do you create departments? Not in ECE. You create them in packaged, and they automatically show up over here in ECE. Right? I configured a department over there in CCE, and lo and behold, now sales and service and the widgets department shows up over here in ECE. Partition admins can manage all departments. Department admins are department limited. And you may also want to think about, depending on maybe your flavor, thoughts, media routing domains. That's not so much true in version 12 with ECE as a way to help segment departments, but it may be something to think about. Okay. SPOG department overview. Generally, if you have a new department, you'd spend a lot of time in your department-based configuration, doing configuration stuff on a per department basis, configuring things like chat and email. And here's right where we would say, if you come back and take that chat and email session, which a couple of you already heard, if you take that class, we can save you a lot of time and frustration just with general navigation and working with ECE. Right? It's not that it's that complex, but just trying to get across some of the terms and understanding how things tie together. A lot easier if you'll let us help you do it. Maybe try to take that on yourself. So we will save you some time. Here we see actually an effect of our department-based configuration. We see that users are added on a per department basis. You wouldn't see that until you did the import, but when we add users, users will show up as agents if they're agents, supervisors if they've been made a supervisor in CCE, and administrators also would show up there based on what you've got configured over there in the package side of the house. Business rules, we would spend a lot of time in class talking about calendars and classification codes, and for sure a lot about these things called queues. A queue is where you're trying to get an email or a chat sent to in ECE that'll ultimately route that call to the packaged environment. Multiple languages supported over there in the SPOG, data adapters for connecting up to other places where data can be found about the interaction, chat or email. Business objects, bunch of variable information we would talk about. And then ultimately what you would finally do if you had ECE is you'd want to get all these newly minted department-based objects like your agents and your skill groups or your PQs, attributes, etc. Dialed numbers and call types would all be department-based. You'd want to make sure that you have an ability to import those into ECE as the correct objects that are also department-based. And you'd want to do this for chat, as well as the next screen shows you email. You come back, we'll explain that whole picture to you and how we ultimately get emails, by example, into the workflow engine via the retriever instance and sent off to a queue where it kicks off magically a script and picks an agent. So remember all these agents and skill groups and whatnot being imported into ECE as hopefully department-based objects. And that's really what we're showing you here on most of this final slide, is that when you go to import objects into ECE, those objects came from objects you configured in PCCE, like agents and supervisors and skill groups and dialed numbers and call types, which all become things like queues over here in ECE. And notice that when you do an import, first thing you must pick if you've got more than one department is actually the department that you want objects to be imported into. Okay. And looks like when we also pick departments, another thing you want to know is, which peripheral gateway are your agents coming from. By example, if you had more than 2,000 agents, you might have multiple peripheral sets, multiple peripherals. And what we tell you about in the other class is that when we import users as agents into a department, they're kind of stuck there. And if we want to get rid of them, in the olden days, we'd actually delete them out of ECE and then re-add them or re-import them. And these days in the package world, it's a little bit more magic. Things that you do over there in package version 12 automatically impact and change what happens with your resources over here in the ECE side of the house. So it's pretty cool. When you go to do an import, by example, of users, well, if you've made a user a department-based user, they're already in there. The only thing you can really import is people that have been made global users. You can, of course, import them into your own department if you wish. Skill groups get imported as department groups. PQs don't actually get imported. All of your media routing domains and your dialed numbers, which are really called script selectors, get imported as ECEQs in a per department basis. So we've shown you today a little bit of information on configuring departments, which start over there in the package world. They're a way to subcategorize, create a line of business for all of your business entities under one instance umbrella of package. And departments also automatically translate over here in the ECE world. And once configured, off you go. There's one final thing you should know about departments and ECE. Once you configure a department, you can delete it out of package, but you can't delete it out of ECE. Right? So be aware of that. Don't go creating a ton of departments. You may not like the end result. So that's all I'll say about that. If you haven't heard about that, we've got 7 new classes that are hopefully about to come out pretty soon, officially anyway. We've been kind of running for a while. So 1-day foundations or fundamentals course, 4-day moves, adds, and changes administration course, 3-day advanced admin, a couple days of reporting, implementation and troubleshooting. It's a good 5-day section. And of course, ECE that we talked about. If you've got some questions about those classes, let us know. And we appreciate your time today, as well as just this week. This is the last session for these 2 days.